What people don't say in love with Burak Cinar. Welcome back. This is not a series about love in the way people usually talk about it. This is not about quick advice, simple answers, or perfect relationships. This is about what actually happens underneath. We have already explored the surface, what women want, what men want, what couples want, fear, and need. But this series goes further. Because relationships don't struggle because of what people say. They struggle because of what they don't say. Because of what they avoid, because of what they delay, because of what they feel, but never fully express. This is a 5-part breakdown of what really shapes love over time. What people don't say, why love dies quietly, what love costs, what breaks love, and the question that sits underneath everything: do you still choose me? This isn't about blame, it's about patterns. It's about behaviors people repeat without noticing, and the silent consequences those behaviors create. Because most relationships don't fail suddenly. They shift, slowly, quietly, until one day, what once felt natural starts to feel distant. This series is about that space, the space between two people, when noticing is technically wrong, but something doesn't feel right anymore. So listen carefully, not just for understanding, but for recognition. Because somewhere in these conversations, you won't just hear ideas, you will recognize patterns and moments, and maybe even parts of your own relationship. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. We have already asked the obvious questions. What women want, what men want, what couples want, what couples fear, and what couples need. We have looked at behavior, we have looked at patterns, we have looked at effort. But none of that gets to the real problem. Because the real problem in relationships is not what people feel, it's what they don't say. This is where love starts to shift. Not in arguments, not in betrayal, not in big moments. In silence, quiet silence, polite silence. The kind of silence that looks like maturity, but it's actually avoidance. Because here's the truth no one likes admitting. Most relationships are not damaged by the wrong words. They are damaged by the right words, never spoken. No one sits down at the beginning and says, one day I'll slowly disconnect from you. One day I'll stop noticing you. One day I'll sit next to you and feel nothing. But that's exactly how it happens. Not dramatically, quietly. People don't say, I feel unsafe with you. They say it's fine. Forget it. It doesn't matter. And every time they say it's fine, something unspoken is added to the list. A list that doesn't disappear. A list that waits. People don't say, I don't feel heard. They repeat themselves, they raise their tone slightly, they become more sensitive to small things. Not because the small things matters, but because it represents something bigger that was never acknowledged. People don't say, I feel disrespected. They become colder, shorter, less patient, less willing to be soft. Respect doesn't live in one moment. It lives in tone, in timing, in how quickly someone stops choosing kindness when it becomes slightly inconvenient. People don't say, I feel alone next to you. They get busy. They scroll, they work longer, they fill the silence with noise, not because they are fulfilled, but because silence is the only place the truth shows up. They sit next to each other, not arguing, not talking, not touching, and they call it peace. But it's not peace, it's distance, without confrontation. People don't say, I'm scared I'm not enough. They react to comparison. They overanalyze tone. They withdraw when they feel judged. Or they try harder, not to connect, but to prove something. Because underneath confidence, logic, independence, there's a quiet question. Am I being replaced? Slowly. People don't say, I don't feel desired anymore. They stop initiating. They test reactions. They notice what used to be natural and is now effort. Desire doesn't disappear loudly. It fades in hesitation, in the gap between instinct and effort. People don't say, I need reassurance. They ask indirectly, are we okay? You have been different lately. Is everything fine? Not because they don't know what they need, but because asking directly feels risky. People don't say, I'm tired of trying alone. They match energy. They stop pushing, stop initiating, stop fixing. Not because they don't care, but because effort without response feels like rejection. And this is where it becomes dangerous. Because when both people start matching effort at a lower level, the relationship doesn't stabilize. It declines. People don't say, do you still choose me? They watch. They observe how quickly they reply, how you speak to them, how you treat others, how often you initiate, how present you are. And they build conclusions, silent ones. And silence is powerful, because silence doesn't just hide the truth, it rewrites it. When people don't communicate clearly, assumptions replace reality, distance replaces effort, pride replaces repair, and slowly the relationship stops being something real. It becomes something performed. Two people functioning, talking about plans, talking about work, talking about anything but the truth. They look stable, but they are disconnected. And the hardest part, they often don't notice when it started. Because it didn't start with one moment. It started with one sentence that felt easier not to say. Then another, until one day there is nothing left to say that hasn't already been buried. And when the truth finally comes out, it doesn't sound like communication, it sounds like a conclusion. I don't feel the same anymore. I have been unhappy for a while. I think we have drifted. But the reality is they didn't drift. They stopped saying what mattered. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Silence does not protect relationships. It protects discomfort in the short term. But long term, it creates distance. It creates misinterpretation. It creates emotional versions of each other that aren't even accurate anymore. And when people don't fall out of love with each other, they fall out of love with the version of each other they have silently constructed. So here's the question this episode leaves with you. What are you feeling that you have decided is safer not to say? Because that's not harmless. That's not small. That's not something that will fix itself with time. That is the starting point of distance. And if you ignore it long enough, you won't need a big reason to lose the relationship. The silence will do it for you. Welcome to the second episode, which is Why Love Dies Quietly. Love doesn't usually end the way people imagine. Not with betrayal, not with shouting, not with a dramatic exit and a slammed door. That's how films tell it. In reality, love ends quietly. So quietly, in fact, that most people don't even notice when it starts. Because relationships don't collapse. They erode. Slowly, subtly, predictably. Not through one big mistake, but through patterns. And here's the part people don't like. Most of those patterns don't look dangerous. They look normal. Later, I'm tired, not now, we'll talk later. And one day, later becomes never. This is how love dies. Not through destruction, through delay. People don't wake up one morning and decide, I'm going to stop loving this person. They wake up and just stop showing up. Slightly less present, slightly less attentive, slightly less curious. And no one panics because the change is small. But small changes, repeated, become distance. This is the first truth. Love doesn't die suddenly. It fades through repetition. You stop asking questions. You stop checking in. You assume instead of understanding. Curiosity disappears first, and when curiosity disappears, connection follows it. Because if you are no longer interested in who the other person is becoming, you are only living with who they used to be. And relationships cannot survive on memory. They need ongoing attention. Now, here's the second part. Love dies when comfort replaces effort. At the beginning, effort is natural. You want to impress, you want to engage, you want to understand, you respond quickly, you listen properly, you notice everything. Later, you still feel the same way, but you stop acting like it. And this is the mistake, because love is not maintained by how you feel. It's maintained by what you continue to do. People believe, if I still love you, that's enough. It isn't, because the other person cannot feel what you don't express. They only experience what you show consistently. So when effort drops, the message becomes unclear. Not intentionally, but effectively. Do they still care? Have I changed? What's different? And when those questions are not answered, they become assumptions. And assumptions are rarely kind. Now here's where it gets darker. Love dies when people become emotionally lazy. Not malicious, not cruel, just passive. They stop repairing quickly. They let small issues sit. They choose comfort over difficult conversations. It's not worth arguing. It will pass. I don't have the energy. But unresolved things don't disappear. They accumulate. And over time, those small unresolved moments become resentment, distance, emotional fatigue. Because it's not one issue. It's 10, 20, 50 small things, never addressed properly. And this is what most people miss. Resentment is not built overnight. It's built silently. Now let's go deeper. Love dies when presence is replaced by distraction. Two people sit on the sofa, together, but not connected. Phone in hand, eyes somewhere else, attention divided. They are physically present, but emotionally unavailable. And they call it normal. But connection doesn't survive background attention. It requires focus. It requires intention. It requires presence. And when presence disappears, something subtle shifts. You stop feeling seen, not ignored, just not fully noticed. And that feeling is where distance begins. Now here's the uncomfortable one. Love dies when honesty is delayed, not avoided completely, just postponed. I'll say it later. I don't want to ruin the mood. I'll bring it up another time. But another time rarely comes at the right moment. So instead, the truth builds up. And when it finally comes out, it doesn't come out calmly. It comes out all at once. Months of silence compressed into one conversation, and now it's overwhelming. Not because the issues are new, but because they were ignored for too long. This is how relationships feel like they suddenly fall apart. They don't. The truth was just delayed. Now, here's one of the darkest truths. Love dies when people stop feeling appreciated. Not unloved, not unwanted, unappreciated. There's a difference. Love can exist silently, but appreciation needs to be expressed. I see you. I notice what you do. It matters. And when that disappears, effort starts to feel invisible. And when effort feels invisible, people stop making it. Not out of punishment, but out of exhaustion. Now we come to the real reason, the one underneath everything. Love dies when both people wait instead of lead, waiting for the apology, the message, the effort, the softening, waiting for the other person to go first. But when both people wait, nothing moves, and silence becomes normal. Distance becomes normal. Disconnection becomes normal. And once something becomes normal, it becomes very hard to challenge. Here's the full picture. Love does not die because one person stopped loving. It dies because effort was reduced, honesty was delayed, presence was replaced, appreciation was forgotten, and both people assumed the other would fix it quietly. And by the time someone finally says we need to talk, it's not the beginning. It's the end of something that's been fading for a long time. So here's the question this episode leaves you with. What are you slowly stopping that used to come naturally? Because that's how love disappears. Not when something breaks, but when something that once existed is no longer repeated. Welcome to the third episode of What People Don't Say in Love with Burak Cinar. This episode is called What Love Costs. So everyone says they want love, they talk about connection, they talk about closeness, they talk about loyalty, passion, understanding. But almost no one talks about the cost. Because love is not free. Not emotionally, not psychologically, not practically. And most relationships don't fail because people didn't feel enough. They fail because people didn't want to pay what it required. Here is the first truth. Love costs your ego. Not sometimes, consistently. You need to be right, you need to win arguments, you need to prove a point. All of that has to be sacrificed. Because love doesn't survive in competition. You can win the argument and lose the connection. You can prove your point and still damage the relationship. And this is where people struggle. Because being right feels good. But being right does not build closeness. Understanding does. And understanding requires something uncomfortable. Letting go of the need to dominate the outcome. Most people don't lose relationships because they are wrong. They lose them because they would rather be right than be connected. Love costs your pride. You will have to apologize when you don't feel like it. You will have to soften when your instinct is to stay cold. You will have to make the first move when you are convinced the other person should. And this is where relationships quietly stall. Two people, both waiting, both justified, both proud. I have done enough. They should come to me. I'm not going to chase. And in that space, nothing moves. Because pride doesn't repair anything. It just pauses everything. Until the pause becomes distance. So love costs your comfort. Not the comfort of feeling safe, the comfort of avoiding effort. Because real connection is not maintained by comfort. It's maintained by intention. You will have to give energy when you're tired. You will have to listen when you'd rather switch off. You will have to engage when it would be easier not to. And most people don't realize this. They think if we are comfortable together, that means we are stable. Sometimes it does, but sometimes comfort is just disguised neglect. When effort disappears and is replaced by routine, the relationship doesn't feel secure. It feels flat. And flat relationships don't usually explode. They fade. And love costs your need for control. So you cannot control how the other person feels, how fast they grow, how perfectly they respond. But you can influence, you can communicate, but you cannot control. And when people try, it shows through pressure, through expectation, through subtle correction. So why didn't you do it like this? You should have said this. That's not what I meant. Control slowly removes safety. Because love needs space to exist, not constant correction. And the more controlled someone feels, the less open they become, until eventually they stop showing parts of themselves altogether. And love costs your silence. You don't get to avoid difficult truths, not long term. You don't get to say it's fine when it isn't. You don't get to delay conversations indefinitely. You don't get to protect the peace by killing honesty. Because silence feels easier in the moment, but over time it becomes distance. And distance becomes interpretation. And interpretation becomes resentment. And by the time you finally speak, it's too much, too late, too loaded. Love costs your independence, partially. Not your identity, not your individuality, but your absolute independence. Because being in a relationship means considering someone else, adjusting, compromising. Not every decision is yours anymore. Not every priority is yours alone. And this is where some people struggle quietly. They want closeness without adjustment. They want connection without responsibility. But love changes the structure of your life. And if you resist that completely, you will always feel restricted. Or the other person will feel secondary. And love costs consistency. Not intensity, consistency. Showing up when it's normal, when it's boring, when nothing exciting is happening. Because anyone can show love at the beginning. Attention is easy at the start. Effort is exciting at the start. Presence feels natural at the start. But over time, it becomes a choice. And love does not survive on occasional effort. It survives on repeated behavior. Not once, not when convenient, but daily. Now here's the part people don't like hearing. If you don't pay these costs, love still exists, but it becomes weaker, less expressive, less safe, less real, until one day it's no longer enough to hold the relationship together. And people say we just grew apart, but they didn't. They avoided the cost of maintaining what they had. Here is the truth no one says clearly. Love is not lost, it is neglected. because the relationship didn't ask for something unreasonable. It asked for effort when it was inconvenient, honesty when it was uncomfortable, humility when ego wanted to lead, presence when distraction was easier. And when those things were consistently avoided, the connection changed, not suddenly, but permanently. So here's the question this episode leaves you with. What part of love are you unwilling to pay for? Your ego, your pride, your comfort, your control, or your silence? Because that's not a small thing. That's the exact place where your relationship will eventually struggle. And if you ignore it long enough, the issue is no longer what went wrong. It is what was avoided for too long. Welcome to the 4th episode of What People Don't Say in Love with Burak Cinar. What breaks love? So, people think love breaks in big moments, like cheating, huge arguments, one person walking away. That's what they remember. But those are not the breaking points. Those are the visible endings. The real break happens much earlier, quietly and internally, because love doesn't break from impact. It breaks from pressure, repeated, unresolved, quietly building. And most of that pressure comes from small things that don't look dangerous at the beginning, until they are. Love breaks when respect disappears. Not love, respect. Because people can love you and still slowly lose respect for you. Through tone, through dismissal, through how you handle conflict, through how you speak about them, especially in front of others. And once respect is damaged, everything changes. Conversations become harder, patience becomes shorter, tolerance becomes lower. Because without respect, love feels unstable. It doesn't matter how strong the feelings are. If someone feels small around you, eventually they stop opening up to you. Love breaks when effort becomes one-sided. Not immediately. At first, one person gives more attention, more time, more energy, and they tell themselves, it's fine, they're just busy, it will balance out. But over time, effort turns into imbalance, and imbalance turns into awareness. I'm doing more, I'm trying more, I'm holding this more together. And when that thought becomes consistent, something shifts. Not anger, fatigue, because effort without recognition feels like rejection. And slowly, they don't stop loving, they stop trying. Love breaks when communication becomes defensive. Not only when people stop talking, when they stop listening. Every conversation becomes explaining, defending, correcting, instead of understanding, being curious, actually hearing the other person. And now even small conversations feel heavy, because it is no longer safe to express something honestly. It becomes, I have to say this carefully. And when communication feels like strategy, connection disappears. Love breaks when people feel constantly criticized. Not corrected, criticized. There's a difference. Correction says this could be better. Criticism says you are the problem. Even subtly, even indirectly. Tone matters more than words, because repeated criticism doesn't just affect behavior. It attacks and affects the identity. And when someone feels like they are consistently failing in a rise, they don't improve, they withdraw. And a withdrawn person cannot connect, even if they want to. Love breaks when emotional safety disappears. not physical safety, emotional. The ability to, I'm not okay, I feel insecure, I need reassurance. Without fear of being judged, being mocked, being dismissed, being told they are too much. Once that safety is gone, truth disappears with it. And when truth disappears, everything becomes surface level. Polite, controlled, disconnected. And a relationship without emotional safety cannot grow. It can only exist. Love breaks when desire is neglected. Not overnight, slowly, quietly. Less touch, less effort, less intention, until it becomes normal. And when desire disappears, people don't always say it, but they feel it. I'm not wanted, I'm not seen like before. And that feeling is dangerous, because desire is not just physical, it's affirmation. It says, I still choose you, I still notice you, I still want you. Remove that consistently, and connection weakens, even if everything else looks fine. Love breaks when comparison enters, subtle comparisons, indirect ones. My friend's partner does this. Other people make more effort. I have seen better, even jokingly, even casually. Comparison does not motivate in relationships. It destroys confidence. Because now it's not just you and your partner. It's you, your partner, and everyone else they are silently competing with. And once someone feels compared, they no longer feel chosen. Love breaks when problems are not repaired, not when they happen, when they linger. Every couple has issues, that's normal. But what matters is what happens after. Do you repair or do you leave it unresolved? Because unresolved issues don't disappear, they layer, one on top of another until the weight becomes too much. And now, even small disagreements feel heavy, not because of the moment, but because of everything behind it. Love breaks when people stop choosing each other intentionally, not once, not at the beginning, daily. Through tone, through effort, through attention, through presence. And when that stops, the relationship doesn't end immediately. It just becomes automatic. Habit, routine, coexistence. And eventually, that's not enough. Because people don't stay where they are just tolerated. They stay when they feel chosen. Now, here is the truth that ties all of this together. Love doesn't break because one thing went wrong. It breaks because multiple small things were repeatedly ignored. Respect slipped, effort became uneven, communication became defensive, safety disappeared, desire faded, problems stayed unresolved. Individually, manageable, but together, destructive. And here's the most honest part. By the time love breaks outwardly, it has already broken internally. One person already checked out partially, already accepted something has changed, already stopped believing it can go back. And the final moment, that's not the break, that's the confirmation. So here's the question this episode leaves you with. Which of these are happening quietly in your relationship? Because none of them look urgent, none of them feel dramatic, but every single one of them is a fracture. And fractures don't need noise to spread, they just need time. Welcome to the final and the fifth episode of What People Don't Say in Love with Burak Cinar, which is, do you still choose me? At the beginning, this question doesn't exist. You don't ask it. You don't think about it. You don't need to. Because in the beginning, choice feels obvious. They choose you in the way they look at you. in how quickly they respond, in how much effort feels natural. You feel it without asking. But over time, that feeling changes, not suddenly, quietly, and somewhere along the way, a question starts to form, not out loud, not directly, but it's there. Do you still choose me? Not out of habit, not out of history, not because it's easier to stay, but actually choose me. That's the real question, because love at the beginning is not a decision, it's instinct, attraction, curiosity. But love over time, love becomes a choice. And this is where relationships are tested. Not when things go wrong, but when things become normal. When life gets busy, when stress increases, when effort is no longer exciting. That's when choice matters. Because people don't doubt love in perfect moments. They doubt it in silence, in small things. When messages take longer, when tone changes, when attention shifts. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, but enough to feel different. And the question returns, do you still choose me? Not in words, in behavior. In how you speak to them on an ordinary day, in whether you notice them without being reminded, in whether you show effort without being asked. Because people don't measure love by what you say, they measure it by what you repeat. And this is where it becomes uncomfortable, because sometimes the answer is unclear. Not yes, not no, just inconsistent. And inconsistency creates doubt faster than absence, because absence is obvious. But inconsistency keeps people hoping that version of you they once felt is still there. Now, here's the truth people don't say directly. When someone starts questioning, do you still choose me? They have already noticed a change. Something is no longer the same. Maybe it's effort, maybe it's attention, maybe it's how you show up, but something has shifted. And this is where relationships start to drift. Not because love disappeared, but because choice became automatic, routine, habit. And habit is dangerous in love, because habit does not reassure, it maintains. And people don't want just to be maintained. They want to be chosen. Every day, not in a dramatic way, in small ways, through tone, effort, presence, attention, consistency. That's how choice is felt, not loudly, but clearly. Now, here is the darker part. Sometimes people stay, they don't leave, they don't cheat, they don't create problems, but they stop choosing emotionally. They do what is required. They say what is expected. They maintain the structure. But the intention, gone. And the relationship doesn't break. It becomes empty. And the other person feels it. Not as a clear problem, as a quiet discomfort. Something they can't fully explain, but can't ignore either. And so they start watching for signs, small things. Do you notice them? Do you prioritize them? Do you still make an effort? And every answer is stored silently. And eventually, they either feel reassured or they feel replaced. Not by another person, but by everything else. Work, routine, comfort, distraction. And here's the truth. People don't need perfection. They don't need constant attention. They don't need grand gestures. They need clarity. They need to feel, I am still chosen. Not assumed, not tolerated, chosen. And this is where most relationships fail quietly. Not because love disappeared, but because choice was no longer expressed. Clear, consistent, intentional. So we come back to the question. not the one you ask them, the one they're asking themselves. Do you still choose me? And the answer is not what you feel, it's what you show daily, without being reminded, without being asked. Because if someone has to ask, something is already missing. And here's the final truth. Love is not proven at the beginning. It's proven over time, in repetition, in consistency, in effort that continues when it's no longer easy. Because at the end of everything, after attraction, after time, after routine, after comfort, there is only one thing that keeps a relationship alive. Not love, choice. And if two people keep choosing each other clearly, consistently, intentionally, even when it's difficult, even when it is quiet, even when it is not exciting, then love doesn't just survive, it stays real. And if they don't fall apart suddenly. They fade while still being together. So the real question is not do you love me? It's simpler and more honest. Do you still choose me today? And this is where we end, not with an answer, but with a reality. We started by asking what people want. Then we looked at what they don't say, how love fades, what it costs, what breaks it. And now we are left with something simpler and harder. Love is not complicated, but it is demanding. It asks for presence when it's easier to withdraw, effort when it's not exciting, honesty when it's uncomfortable, consistency when it becomes routine. And most importantly, it asks for choice. Not once, not at the beginning, every day. Because in the end, relationships do not survive on history. They do not survive on intentions. And they do not survive on feelings alone. They survive on what two people continue to do after everything becomes normal, after the attraction settles, after life gets busy, after silence becomes easier than truth. That's where love is either maintained or quietly lost. So if you take that anything from the series, let it be this. Love doesn't disappear. It's either reinforced or neglected. Every day, in small ways. And most of the time, no one notices which one they are doing until it's too late. So don't ask, is the love still there? Ask something more honest. Am I still choosing this person? Clearly, consistently, intentionally. And more importantly, do they feel it? Because love is not what you feel. It's what the other person experiences from you over time. And if both people get that right, love doesn't just survive. It stays real. And that is the real difference.